Hey shooters and reloaders out there in YouTube land. So if any of y'all have a Dillon Square Deal B and maybe you noticed that one time during your reloading that it was extremely difficult to operate that. Felt like there was a lot of resistance somewhere down there in that handle. That happened to me the other day, so I did a little bit of researching on the internet and found out that the most likely culprit is probably your crank pin. Okay, so the crank pin, you can see right there, that's labeled in the exploded view 13622. You can see it goes right through that hole, and then that lower part of the press goes into the void, so that crank pin goes through that reciprocating part of the press and through that hole in the handle. Okay, that's the one I just pulled out, the crank pin. You can see it's pretty grimy. I'm going to just clean it off with some solvent, then grease it back up. So there on the actual press, okay, you can see there's the hole and that main part of the case, the part that goes up and down, and then right there on the press, that's that hole that goes into that void. Right, you can see it, you kind of saw it moving in through there. Crank pin goes through there and holds those all together. All you got to do is there's a little tiny set screw, that little tiny guy right there. Okay, you can see right there that goes into that back part of the handle. So you got to loosen up that little set screw, and it uses a 5/64 Allen wrench. So loosen up that set screw, then just use a punch and a hammer and tap it out. I don't know if it matters if you go from left to right, but I tap mine out from the left of the press, so from left to right. So you tap it out, clean off that old grease, degrease it, just use a solvent, simple green, whatever you got, then grease it back up. You can use the grease that comes with the Dillon machine. I'm going to just use the frog lube, the paste kind. So I'm going to do that, I'll put it back together, and then we'll see if that worked. Alright, so I got that wrist pin, or crank pin, because it kind of reminds me of a wrist pin. So I got that crank pin degreased, and you can see there's some good, I don't know what you call that, scoring or marring. There's something up right there. Right? See that part's all nice and polished. And that part's got some roughage on it. Right, so I'm going to take some very fine grit sandpaper. I'm going to buff that out a little bit. Okay, I got the crank pin and the vise there, just using a rag to pat it. I've got some 600 grit sandpaper, and so far I've just, maybe about 30 seconds now, I've been buffing it, and it was taking some of that nasty scoring right off. So I'll just get the last little bit here. And you can see already it kind of is doing pretty well, just using the sandpaper to smooth things over. Okay, I'm going to wipe it down and get some grease on it, and then we'll go from there. So there we go, we finished polishing it up with the 600 grit sandpaper. And you can see, you know, kind of a little bit of scratch in there. But it's better than what it was. You know, you've seen before, it was all pretty chewed up. So got it polished up a little bit, and we'll get it greased up, put back in the press. Alright, we're down here at the bottom of the press now, so you can see that part in the arm or the lever, that hole. Alright, you're going to get it in there, you know, line it up so you got equal light on all sides. Then you're going to take that wrist pin, or I keep calling it wrist pin, the crank pin. Alright, I got my grease on there, and go ahead and use your hammer and your punch and just tap that sucker in. Alright, so you get it lined up. get them in there, and then just start tapping it in till it's flush on each side. Okay, so we just drove that crank pin back into the press and the handle. Now remember, the last thing is that little tiny set screw. We got to get him back in there. So you got to kind of crawl under the press to get that sucker back in there, because you see there's that relief cut in the middle of that pin. So you got to get that little retaining screw in there so that that crank pin doesn't back out or start driving out either way. And you're going to need a 5/64 Allen wrench for that little teeny tiny set screw. Alright, so I'm going to get him put in, get the press put back together, and then it's kind of hard to show you exactly on the camera, but we'll just see if it's a lot smoother. Just one more little tip: if you don't have a magnetic Allen wrench, getting that set screw back in there is really tough to do with your hands. You kind of got to use a wrench to even get it started threading. So if you don't have the magnetic Allen, just put a dab of grease there in the head of the screw, and that kind of creates a little bit of a vacuum and keeps it in there for you. Okay, got the press all put back together. I just wanted to show you guys, these are the only tools that you need to do this. You need your grease. I haven't used frog lube, but whatever grease you want to use. A punch and a hammer. This is the biggest punch that I have, and it's 3/16. The Allen wrenches, or the Allen keys, I had a 3/16, a 5/32, 1/8, 3/32, and 5/64. Also using the exploded view there in the manual. So I probably should have shown in the beginning what exactly was wrong with the press. But the press, you needed a lot of force to push a handle down and a lot of force to push a handle up. Kind of just looking at the exploded view, looking for friction points on there. Figured like the ram. Nothing appeared to be wrong with the ram. Then I looked down there at that pin. I keep calling it a wrist pin. I just call it a wrist pin. I looked at the wrist pin after taking it out, and I saw how chewed up it was. Buffed it out, greased it up, greased all the other points that make metal contact. And now I'll go ahead and show you guys. The thing will almost fall under its own weight. Yeah, so it's butter now. It's absolutely gorgeous. So we're back in business. But I hope that helped. Again, I've had that press maybe 3 years, 3-4 years. I probably reloaded, I don't know, 3,000 to 4,000 rounds on it before this happened. So far, that's the only problem I've had with it, other than the occasional hiccup with the primer feeding system. Seems like all Dillons have that every once in a while, and it's just that little plastic part at the bottom that actually feeds the primers from the tube into the ram, and you just swap it out and that's it, no big deal. So good press, and that was the only issue. If that does happen to yours, again, where it's hard to push down or to pull up, probably the most likely culprit is that crank pin. So if that happens to you, hopefully you can use this video to help yourself. Alright, take care out there. Bye.